Hello, Mooncrafters. Welcome. This is Craft of Moon. My name's Ryan with Astrology by Ryan, and Craft of Moon is a new exploration of mine into the moon and all of her mysterious manifestations. If you're interested in this topic and would like to continue to follow on, please go ahead and subscribe. And if you're interested in potentially working with me on a client basis, I do have openings in my schedule. So please go ahead and visit my website, ryan-hunt.com, and you'll be able to find information on booking an appointment with me. You'll be able to find that link in the description below, as well as links to my other social media presences and to the Craft of Moon mailing list, where you can join the mailing list to receive updates on this particular exploration of the moon. Today, we're going to be talking about 4 of the key points in the lunation cycle. Let's go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to be talking about the 4 lunation points. These are the pillars of transition in the lunation cycle. And at the core of the lunar cycle are these 4 critical transition points. And they're going to be very familiar to most of you. Each of them represents a moment in change in the moon's journey between light and dark. After this video, in follow-on videos, I've got a series of additional videos, supplemental information that I'll be continuing on from this. The first one is the 2 divisions of illumination, the balance of shadow and shine. Then the 2 hemicycles, the dance of accumulation and dissemination. Then the 2 growth patterns, the early and late phases of transition. And then we'll be getting into the philosophy of light and dark and the cyclical nature of creation and dissolution. But today we're going to be focusing on the 4 points, and we're going to be starting out with the idea of constructing the pillars in the chart. And I'm talking about an astrology chart. And we use astrology charts to track the planets at any particular time in their positions relative to Earth. As we start out, the very basis of an astrology chart is the blank canvas. And this is an important thing to recognize as we talk about it. As we move forward in this exploration, we'll be talking about what the blank canvas means geometrically as well as mythologically or philosophically. The next part that we'll be looking at is the circle. And the circle and dividing up the circle is about where we're going to get to today. So we're going to be looking at the blank canvas and the circle and some of the divisions of the circle relative to the orbit of the moon around the Earth. We'll be talking about this in a way where we're looking at philosophy as being derived from geometry and mythology. And we can think about philosophy as having many different sources, but in this exploration, we're going to be specifically talking about geometry and mythology. First, we'll be looking at geometry. Again, the blank canvas. When we look at the blank canvas, the blank screen, the empty page, from a philosophical standpoint in geometry, this represents 0. When we look at geometry overall, there's not really a lot of opportunity to represent or experience 0, since in geometry, we're dealing with at least a single point, one-dimensionally or bigger. At least in all the 2-dimensional representations of the charts that we're looking at in astrology. There's no other real way to think about 0. So we think about the blank canvas as the state of 0 in from a geometric standpoint. Then we have the circle. And the circle is it's got some interesting philosophical paradigms that we're going to be looking at. And it really represents the form aspect of the ineffable, the unknowable. And here's why. When we look at a circle, we can understand the circle in terms of its circumference, which is the measurement of the circle itself, the outside edge of the circle. This is the circumference, the perimeter of the circle. And then there's a measurement right through the middle. This is called the diameter. This may be review for a lot of you from high school geometry. The interesting thing about this particular relationship is that this is a specific relationship that we call pi. And this symbol here is the symbol of pi. Pi is a Greek letter, and it's used to denote this relationship between the circumference and the diameter. And the interesting thing about this relationship is that no matter how big or how small the circle is, this relationship remains constant for every circle of every size. The circle could be the size of the entire universe or the size of a single atom, and still this proportional relationship that we call pi, that measures this relationship between the circumference and the diameter, will remain the same. When we calculate pi and represent it as a number, we get this long string of numbers here. And some of you may remember this from high school, or you may have children or know nieces or nephews or somebody that's going through kind of like high school level geometry. And often one of the things that teachers like to do is get children to memorize the number of digits of pi, and they get awards for being able to memorize the most digits. Well, the thing that's interesting about this and why that's such a challenge is that there is no end to the number of digits after the decimal place when we're measuring pi. Not only is there no end to the number of digits, but there is no pattern that ever repeats. We have never been able to find any repeating pattern in all of the digits that anybody has ever calculated for pi. What this means is that we can never truly know with any exact precision the numerical measurement of pi, or the numerical representation between the diameter and the circumference, which means we can only ever know one of those measurements truly from a calculation standpoint. And this is a unique experience with geometry, because squares we can calculate precisely, triangles we can calculate, hexagons, all of the different shapes we can calculate precisely, but the circle has this magical relationship where we are unable to actually define with exact precision numerically this relationship between the circumference and the diameter. And so between these two concepts, the blank screen, which represents 0, and this circle, we have two representations of the ineffable. 0 is the ineffable because it is nearly synonymous with infinity. When we think of 0, there's no way to actually comprehend it other than the conceptual naming it 0, but there's no way to actually arrive at a conceptual state of understanding the absolute nothingness of all of the universe, nor is there any way to truly understand all of infinity. So these are very extreme, ineffable concepts mathematically, and pi is one of those ineffable concepts when it comes to the representation of geometry in the form world. So this is an important philosophical paradigm that we're going to be talking about, or introducing into the discussion of the orbits of the planets around the solar system and the moon's orbit around the Earth. Next, we're going to be looking from the standpoint of mythology. And again, we come back to the blank screen, the tabula rasa, the empty piece of paper, the white canvas, so to speak. And when we look at it from a mythological standpoint, we are able to derive concepts such as chaos, the abyss, emptiness, pure intelligence, luminosity, spontaneity, and clarity. These are the kinds of concepts that we talk about when we are thinking about the philosophical representation of the white canvas from a mythological standpoint as it relates to what we're engaging in astrology. And when we think about chaos, chaos is really important. From the Greek standpoint, chaos is a Greek word, or it comes from the Greek. And we're not talking about the modern use of the term in the sense of a lot of things that are mixed up and don't have any specific order. When we're talking about chaos at this level, we're talking about the primordial state of complete and absolute capacity, the emptiness of the state of form such that all form can exist within it. It's a kind of abstract and ineffable concept as well. And it's this sense of chaos that we start to work with when we are working with the mythological connections to astrology. So we have the circle. And in astrology, from the mythological standpoint, when we look at the circle, the first component of the circle, the first manifestation of the circle is the representation of Earth. So Earth is the circle itself. And in Greek mythology, chaos was this state of great capacity that existed, out of which arose Gaia. Gaia was the first in many mythological constructs. Sometimes there were others. Some legends say that night arose before Earth, but for the sake of the philosophy that we're going to be going with here, we're going to be taking Earth as the first emanation out of chaos. And so the first circle on our page is going to be representative of Earth. And then when we zoom out on that, out of Gaia, out of Earth, arose Uranus, and that's the sky. So we have the sky, Uranus, or Langi, and we have the Earth, Gaia, Papa. These are different names in different cultures. And that's the representation we have, in the sense that we look at the Earth as the center of the experience that we're talking about. And we as individuals are represented by Earth. We are Earth in the context of our astrology chart. We are at the center of the circle. So when we're going to be talking about the following slides and basically everything that we're talking about in astrology, for the most part, we're going to be referencing a geocentric model of the representation of the planet's orbits around Earth as if they were orbiting Earth. Now, we know that the planets orbit the sun. The moon does, in fact, orbit the Earth. So since we're talking about the craft of moon, the moon's orbit is very specifically a geocentric experience. And so that's the paradigm that we need to go with from this standpoint. The next piece of the chart that we're looking at is the moon itself. And the moon, relative to Earth, orbits the Earth in a circular pattern. And the moon rotates, its revolutions are equal to its orbital path. And that means that the moon always presents to Earth the same face. The same side of the moon is always showing towards Earth. And this is a unique experience in planetary orbits called tidal lock. The next planet, or the next object on our diagram, is the sun. And I want to remind us that we are talking about a geocentric representation of the orbit of the sun. And we get this geocentric representation because the Earth is rotating. And the rotation of the Earth causes the sun to traverse the ecliptic as it moves across the sky of the Earth. And this phenomenon of the sun moving across the sky is created by the Earth's rotation. But when we put them onto a chart like this, we chart both the moon and the sun from a geocentric standpoint, with the Earth, or us, as the native of the chart at the center. So Let's go ahead and start looking at where we find these 4 pillars of the lunation, these 4 points that are critical in the lunation cycle. Where do we find those pillars in the moon itself? The first is the dark moon. The dark moon is when the sun and the moon are in alignment in the sky. Now, they may not actually be like precisely aligned. That happens when the sun and the moon are in alignment with the node of the moon, which we'll talk about later. We're not going to get into the nodes right now. But the moon moves up and down across the ecliptic. We'll get into all these terms later, but it moves up and down in the sky. And the sun moves straight in the sky. And so because the sun and the moon, the moon moves up and down and the sun moves straight, they don't always meet exactly in a 3-dimensional space. But when we put that onto a 2-dimensional representation and we're casting their location onto the ecliptic, then from the ecliptic standpoint, they are in the same place. And when they are in the same place, that's the conjunction or the dark moon. And this is when the light of the moon is not seen from Earth. All the light is on the other side of the moon. Next, we have what is called the first quarter. Now, this is an interesting name for this particular geometric experience because you can see that the moon is halfway illuminated. When I was a child, I couldn't understand why they called this the first quarter, because it was clear to me that half the moon was illuminated. So why don't they just call it the half moon? And I often did try to call it the half moon and was corrected many times that it's actually the first quarter. Well, the reason why it's the first quarter is when we divide that circle into 4 parts, we get these triangles here. And we can see that here is a 90-degree angle. This is a right triangle, otherwise known as a square angle. And it's this square angle that is causing the name the first quarter, because when we divide the circle into quarters, we get these 90-degree squares, and it's this quarter here, which is the first quarter relationship. To see that a little bit more, we can see that the sun here and the moon here are creating the points that the hypotenuse of the right triangle traverses. Hypotenuse is a geometric term that talks about the length of a triangle that's opposite, this 90-degree angle. You don't need to worry about that right now. I don't want to get too technical with the geometry terms, because it's really what's important is the sun and the moon, and understanding that it's the arc from the sun to the moon that we're measuring 90 degrees of arc. And that's where we get this first quarter moon. The second quarter is when the sun and the moon are in opposition. They are directly opposite each other in the sky. Now, again, if this happens to line up with one of the nodes of the moon, then we have an eclipse. Otherwise, we have a full moon. This is the second quarter of the lunation, the second point of the lunation cycle. And the third point is the third quarter. This is when the other side of the moon becomes light and the other side becomes dark. The light and dark switches places on the moon as the moon continues to travel along her orbital path. And then we come back to the dark moon, completing the cycle in its entirety. So again, thinking about these 4 lunation points, these are pillars of transition because they're very clear states that we can see in the moon when we look up in the sky. We can see the darkness of the moon. We can see the fullness of the moon, and it's clear to see half the moon and how that flips sides within the cycle of the moon around the Earth. So when we look at those, we can see it represented in this way: the dark moon, the first quarter, the third quarter, the fourth quarter, and finally back to the dark moon again. Looking at the dark moon, this is the conjunction, and it represents the invisible beginning. The conjunction marks the dark moon, a time when the moon is aligned with the sun and becomes completely invisible. This moment of darkness symbolizes the potential and gestation of new energy. It's like planting season. It's when we start seeding things for potential and possibility. It's the phase of an unmanifest creation, the idea in our mind before it starts to come into fruition, where all possibilities lie dormant but ready to emerge. And this state is synonymous with the state of chaos, that blank screen, because this is where it is the all possibilities lie, where it is the capacity of capacity. This is the womb of the lunation cycle. It is where things gestate, and it is a time for planting intentions that will later grow into visible form. Then we have the first quarter. The first quarter is the challenge of illumination. This is called the inferior square. We're not going to get into the technical details of that right now. It's the inferior square simply because that's what we call it. We call it a planet is in the inferior position when it's in that direction, when it's in the, they call it the secondary motion of the sky. When the planet is, if you were at the center and looking out, when the planet is to the left-hand side, then that is the inferior position. And this represents the challenge of illumination. It's the first quarter, a moment of crisis in action, where the moon reaches half illumination. And this is a turning point that represents the struggle between light and dark. In the moon, we are seeing this battle of light and dark take place across the face of the moon. Which side is going to win? Is dark going to win? Is light going to win? What side is going to win in the battle of across the face of this moon? This is where decisions must be made to move forward, and this phase symbolizes the first major challenge of growth as energy accumulates and confronts obstacles on its way to fullness. Then we have the full moon, the third quarter. And the full moon is the oppositional aspect. It is when the two planets, the sun and the moon, the two luminaries, are directly opposite each other in the sky. And this is a visible culmination of what was planted or inseminated at the start of the lunar cycle. The full moon is the apex of light, where the moon fully reflects the sun's rays, and darkness is momentarily defeated. It represents the culmination of energy, where everything is seated in the dark moon and reaches its fullest expression. This phase symbolizes clarity, revelation, and insight, where the light of awareness illuminates everything that was hidden in the darkness. Then we have the last quarter. The last quarter is what's called the superior square. It is the challenge of reflection, where we are trying to move back into connection with the sun. The last quarter represents a crisis in consciousness, where the moon's light begins to wane and reflection becomes necessary, introspection. It is a phase of reassessment and letting go, where what was once fully visible now retreats into the shadows of things that may be less seen, into the twilight, so to speak. The last quarter symbolizes a time for internal integration, for developing an understanding of what has been gained during the waxing phase as the moon prepares to complete the cycle. So this is the four lunation points. These are the pillars of transition. Next, we'll be talking about the two divisions of illumination, the two hemicycles, the true growth patterns in the philosophy of light and dark as it is relevant for the moon. This here is a diagram or a picture of the moon. These are actual photographs. You can see where you can go to get a copy of this on the Wikimedia site. And this is just a day-by-day photo of the moon as she goes through all of her phases through a complete lunation cycle. That's it for today's presentation. Again, my name is Ryan with Astrology by Ryan. This is Craft of Moon, a project and an exploration of the moon and all of her many mysterious manifestations. And we're going to be releasing these long form videos on Sundays. Not every Sunday, but the cycle will be the long form videos are on Sundays, and the short form daily moonbeams that are a delineation of the day for the moon's sign and phase and house of the moon. Those will be delineated on a daily basis in 1-minute short clips. You can find the playlist for the daily moonbeams on my channel. You can also find the playlist for the Craft of Moon long form videos and other videos that'll be releasing for Craft of Moon on my list. Please, if you want to continue following along, subscribe, like this video, share it with your friends. I'm really excited and passionate about this project and looking forward to diving into this with you. In the description below are links to my other social media channels. It is there's a link to subscribe to the mailing list so you can get updates on Craft of Moon and the different things we'll be doing with this project. It's going to go beyond videos, so I'm really excited about it. So go ahead and sign up there if you're interested in following along. And if you're interested in working with me as a client, I do have openings. October's a little bit full, but I do have openings in October and in November and December and on into next year. So please feel free to reach out on my website, the link also in the description, ryan-hunt.com. And looking forward to working with you more